So today's topic we're going to talk about is the United States actually entering the Vietnam War, which had actually been happening long before the United States even got involved. So today what we're going to look at is the reasons that the United States originally helped the French fight the Vietnamese. The conflict starts way back right after World War II between the French and the Vietnamese, and is going to continue all the way up into the 70s with eventually the United States versus the Vietnamese. We're going to talk about the ways which the U.S. actually opposed communism in Southeast Asia and why we wanted to oppose communism there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the involvement in Vietnam. Today, we're just going to focus on the United States getting involved. We're going to stop when we actually been deploying our troops into Southeast Asia. So this is the area we're talking about. This is called French Indochina, which is a major insult to the people living there because they are neither French nor Chinese. But you can see that Vietnam runs almost the entire length of the coast. You got Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand all in there, and right above it is China. The area of where this is located is very crucial because the South China Sea is actually one of the heaviest shipping areas on the planet. So the communists and the capitalists both want to kind of control this area so they can control the trade that goes through there. Where we're obviously going to be focusing on is mostly Vietnam, and then when we get to the end of this unit, we're going to be talking about Cambodia. So the origins of the Vietnam War start with colonial Vietnam, which is under the rule of the French, and this is called French Indochina. So France conquered the area of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and they really don't appreciate this. So there's a growing nationalist movement called the Viet Minh, led by the man you see on the right, and he is Ho Chi Minh. The key piece about this is he is a communist, but he's a nationalist first. He wants to unite all the Vietnamese. Notice I didn't say the Laotians and the Cambodians. He just wants to unite the Vietnamese, throw out the French, and create their own government. The French are then kicked out by the Japanese during World War II. The Japanese conquer all of French Indochina. It's a major battleground because of the resources that are there. And the Viet Minh continue to organize and oppose the Japanese during their occupation. So this leads to Ho Chi Minh becoming a folk hero and being viewed as the leader of this growing nationalist movement in Vietnam to create their own country. And after World War II, they're actually going to expect their own nation to be given to them because they say, we fought the Japanese too, we deserve our own country. What ends up happening, though, is the First Indochina War. And this is the first phase, you could kind of say, of the Vietnam War. And the United States isn't super involved in this. So the French reconquer French Indochina. If you look at the top right-hand corner, they send in their troops, they reconquer it because France wants the resources to be able to rebuild their nation. And the Viet Minh continue to resist. So originally they were fighting the Japanese, and they just transfer over to fighting the French. The Viet Minh plead, Ho Chi Minh goes and he pleads with the United States to recognize Vietnam as an independent nation. But the United States wanted to stay on France's good side because France was part of that coalition resisting the Soviet Union, and we decided to go with the French instead. This is because of the Domino Theory. We were afraid that if Vietnam would fall, all those other nations surrounding it would follow. And this is part of containment. If there's one thing you're going to remember from this unit, let it be the domino theory. So think about if you have a bunch of dominoes all lined up in a row and you flip the first one. That one's going to fall, it's going to hit the other one, it's going to cause a chain reaction, and they're all going to fall down. The United States thought communism would work like this. If one small nation fell to communism, then the next would, the next would, the next would. So Vietnam would be the first key, then Cambodia, then Laos, then Burma, and next thing you know, Japan, India, South Korea, they're all falling to communism, and Asia will be a communist nation. So the United States, by supporting France, kind of makes their own enemy now with the Vietnamese who want to create their own nation. Remember, they are communist, but they're also nationalist Vietnamese who want to create their own nation. So the United States sends arms and supplies to the French to help the French fight back against the Viet Minh to kind of control the country. We're going to see that this does not last very long. The French sink money, lives, arms, munitions, everything they have into Vietnam, but it just basically becomes a money pit for the French. So here's the domino theory. You can kind of see the idea of it, okay? China was the first, then North Korea, Vietnam, and it will just continue down the line. And the United States wants to stop that Vietnam domino from falling and causing the other nations to kind of collapse. So at Dien Bien Phu, the French are finally defeated. So a whole French army is cut off by the Vietnamese, the Viet Minh forces, and is destroyed. The French ask the United States to send troops. We do not, and the French army is defeated. At the Geneva Conference in 1954, what happens is it's a peace agreement for Indochina. All the nations of Indochina, those three that I talked about, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, they all get their independence. But Vietnam is going to be very interesting because the Viet Minh are going to be given North Vietnam, and a democratic capitalist government is going to be set up at the south, and it's going to be divided at the 17th parallel. And this is very reminiscent of the Korean War, where the North and the South were divided, with the North being the communist government and the South being a capitalist government. And this is going to be the same thing with the Viet Minh in the North, the anti-communist in the South. And notice I didn't say democracy in the South. The South was barely a democracy. It had a dictator, very autocratic, but it was anti-communist, so the United States supported it because of that reason. So here's the dividing line, North Vietnam up top in red, South Vietnam in green. And if you look at that lime green line in the middle, that is the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. It's meant to be the same kind of thing as it was in Korea, but it's never going to be as heavily armed because North and South Vietnam are extremely mountainous, jungle, very rural. There's a lot of places to hide, and we're going to see that the war is much more of a guerrilla war than it was in the Korean War. The North is put under the control of Ho Chi Minh. He's that nationalist leader. He's very popular. He's a communist. He immediately begins to take control there. Um, in the South, we have Diem, who takes over, and he is a high-ranking official under the French. So he's already not popular because they see him as an occupier. And he is also Catholic. He's Catholic in a majority Buddhist country, and he is absolutely hated in the South by the majority of his people. So naturally, a lot of South Vietnamese begin switching over to the northern side. They're going to form guerrilla groups. They're going to try and overthrow Diem, and we'll see that even the United States will eventually sanction a coup to remove Diem from power. So there's Ho Chi Minh on the left, and there's Diem on the south. You notice how they dress differently. Ho Chi Minh dresses in more traditional Vietnamese clothing styles, where Diem looks like any official from a Western country or the Soviet Union. So in the 1950s, the North begins to supply what are called the Vietcong in the South. And the Vietcong stands for the National Liberation Front. And they are South Vietnamese communists. That's a piece that you should star and remember. They're not soldiers from the North. They are South Vietnamese people who are rebels fighting against the South Vietnamese government. They want to flip it to communism. So in support, the United States begins to supply the South Vietnamese with weapons and armaments. Originally, this isn't a problem, but when U.S. involvement begins to change is when in the 1960s, President Kennedy sends military advisors. These are not soldiers who are actually going to fight the Viet Cong. They're not going to fight the North. They're supposed to train and arm the South Vietnamese. But we can kind of see the United States is slowly getting more involved. Originally, we didn't send the French anything. We didn't send any troops. We just supported South Vietnam. And now we're sending advisors. We're slowly getting sucked into this conflict. The U.S. eventually, like I told you before, supports Diem's overthrow in the South. Diem became increasingly dictatorial in his powers, so Kennedy gives the okay for a coup to happen. Diem will be overthrown, and he will be executed and replaced by military generals. So the South is having a lot of turmoil, a lot of trouble at this point. It's not doing very well, and the North is going to see this and try and take advantage of it. So by the 1960s, South Vietnam is basically collapsing. The Viet Cong control large amounts of the countryside. The North is pressing down on the DMZ. Everybody knows that a war is going to break out to reunify the country. And what happens that changes the whole aspect of the conflict is the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So the USS Maddox was a U.S. Navy ship patrolling out in the Gulf of Tonkin, and it was reportedly attacked by North Vietnamese gunboats. What President Johnson, who replaced President Kennedy after he was assassinated, asked for is in the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And this gives him the congressional approval to put troops in Vietnam. So the goal of this is to protect U.S. troops and stop further aggression. Notice it says nothing about actually attacking the North. Vietnam War is a war waged without a declaration of war. The United States actually never declares war on North Vietnam. Our only goal, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution says, is to protect our troops that are already there and to stop further aggression by the North against the South to turn it communist. So the United States is just protecting what is already there. We're containing communism. Vietnam is another example of trying to contain communism. This gives the United States the ability to now basically join the Vietnam War. We'll start seeing bombing of the North. We'll start seeing American troop levels increasing, blockading of North Vietnam's ports to try and contain that aggression and stop the war from escalating. So I hope that helps give you a little background about the Vietnam War. As always, if you have any questions, just ask.